Welcome, and Baruch atah Adonai Eloheinu melech haolam, asher kitshanu b'mitzvotav v'tzivanu la'asok b'divrei Torah. So there's a double portion that we are studying. We already were able to complete the Rashis on Chukat, and we're now on Balak. And the thing about Balak, it's a very interesting and in some ways very unique portion. Here in the midst of the Torah, for the most part, we have this narrative of Balaam and Balak that is unbeknownst to the Israelites. This is all taking place without their knowledge. And I think there's a certain pathos in this. Um, you could say that in some ways, what causes humanity to go off the rails is a lack of appreciation. That we don't fully realize the degree to which we are blessed as human beings, and the fact that so much of the life that we have is something that's an amazing blessing from God. And so we don't have the appreciation of the divine. We don't sense the degree to which we're blessed by the divine. And this story of Balak and Balaam is a great example of this, because here is this king Balak who wants to curse the Israelites, to defend his own nations from their coming in and taking over the land of Israel. And he hires this prophet Balaam, and God will not allow Balaam to curse the Israelites. But not only will God not allow Balaam to do it, but he will take those very words and cause Balaam to bless the Israelites. And that's what we're in the middle of right now. We are in the midst of these words of blessing that, as well as the narrative, and the words of blessing are essentially in poetry. And so there's a lot of Rashi because it requires a lot of interpretation in order to understand the poetry. The poetry is very difficult in comparison to other parts, certainly to the narrative portion. And this Parsha ends with an act of selfishness on the part of the Israelites. And so that what this Parsha does is to highlight and bring to mind this particular nature of things and human nature. So appreciation, as I learned from another rabbi who put it very, very well, is the cornerstone. It's the essence of spirituality. To try and develop a sense of appreciation in our hearts at all the good things that actually surround us and see that as an amazing discipline. So we're in the midst of Bilam's words of blessing as he looks at the Jewish people or the Israelites and winds up blessing them. And here's what he say. Mi mana afar Yaakov. Who counted, or who can count, the dust of Jacob, umispar et rova Yisrael, and the number, the count of the rova, and that's a hard word to translate here, and Rashi's going to do an amazing job of translating this. And the Targum itself, the Aramaic translation, translates this particular section, and Rashi acknowledges the validity of the Targum, and we'll take a look at the Targum. I'll do my best to translate the Aramaic for you. So the rova, I won't translate the word for now, but I made the note that rova comes from a word for, or it can mean to mount in the sense of cohabitation. Tamut, let me keep going. Tamut nafshi, may my soul die mot yesharim, the death of those who are upright, utehi acherit kamohu, and my end be like his. So again, to underscore the nature of Hebrew poetry is this idea of parallelism. So we notice the parallel phrasing here, right? Who counted the dust of Jacob, the number of the rova of Israel. So you see that parallel there. And likewise, as we get to the end of this verse. So let's take a look at the Targum before we go into the Rashi. Man Yehu, who is capable, lemimne de adkaya, to count the children. So adkaya, so he understands the afar. He translates the dust as referring to the children, Devet Yaakov, of the house of Jacob. De Amir Alehen, okay, concerning who was stated, Yiskun Ka'afra de Ara, let them multiply like the dust of the earth. So he is explaining this one word of afar, a dust, as actually being a poetic reference to the promise that God made that they would be as numerous as the dust of the earth. O hada ma'arba mashritaya to Israel. Okay. Now, chada, I'm not certain what, I missed this on the translation, right? So I'm afraid I'm not able to translate that right now. I would have to look it up, and I'm not going to take the time, okay? Chada also can mean, well, I don't want to guess. It's okay. Ma'ar Mashitraya, from the four camps of Israel, of the Israelites. So you may recollect at the beginning of the book of Numbers, we read about how the camp, the Israelite camp, was set up to correspond to the four cardinal points, and there were three camps in each of the four sides, and that's what he's saying, right? Um, I'm tempted, forgive me, to say chada means something to see or something like that. Anyway, I'll have to look it up. Tamut, let's keep going. Tamut, let's find the, okay, here it is. Nope, I'm not seeing it. Let's see. It's interesting that I'm not seeing the Targum here. Let's see if we can go here. Maybe it's here. No. Oh, okay. All right. Yes, yes, yes. Here we go. Forgive me. Tamut nafshi mota de kashitohi. May my soul die the death of his, I believe we'd say, short means truth, something like that. But it is, I think we simply can translate it as his righteous ones. Ve'ehei sofi kevaton, and may my end be like theirs. So you can see from that first part of the Targum how he takes it and actually interprets the poetry there. So let's take a look. Sorry. Yes. Mi mana afar Yaakov. Who can count the dust of Jacob? And Rashi simply says, Ketargumo. He says, just as the Targum, that's how we need to understand this, as the Targum translates it, de adkaya devet Yaakov, the infants of the house of Jacob, v'chule, etc. Okay. And then, of course, the Rova, right? Me arba mashrita, from the four camps, arba de galim, the four banners. And he says there's another way to, so that's one way to understand it, that he's talking about the uh, the uh, the uh, the encampments. He says it's also davar acher, the another interpretation, afar Yaakov, right? He's saying with regards, when we talk about the dust of Jacob, what are we talking about? En cheshbon b'mitzvot shehem mekaymin afar. He says you cannot count the number of commandments that they have, that they observe with dust, and he's going to explain what we mean that. In other words, that set of commandments that involves dust, earth, dust of the earth. So he gives, for example, in Deuteronomy 23, Lo tacharosh b'shor uvechamor, you shall not reap, right? You shall not reap the harvest, or plow. You shall not plow, forgive me, with an ox and a donkey together. You weren't allowed to hitch those two animals together. It was considered a cruel act. But there it is in Deuteronomy stated as a mitzvah, right? And then, of course, we have in Leviticus 19, Lo tizra kilayim. You shall not sow mixed seeds. And there's a whole bunch of mitzvahs involved in preventing the notion of mixing seeds in the earth. Afar para, in the king, or afer para, we could talk about the ashes of the red heifer, the afar sota, and the dust that the woman suspected of adultery is supposed to consume, right? Ukul yotzeh bahem, and similar to that. So again, the idea being that the Jewish people, that the Israelites, have this relationship with the divine, where they have the privilege of being directly commanded, of being able to fulfill divine will in a very kind of specific place, and it places them at a very high level. Umispar et Rova Yisrael, right? The count of the Rova of Yisrael. This is the other interpretation. Revi Otehen. So we're talking about the way in which they engage in sexual conduct. Here we go. Let's see, let me make sure. Yes, Zera, how you would say, the seed that comes out, min hatashmish shelahem, that is a result of their engaging in sex. So the rova is the noun that we have from the verb rova, to, in the sense, to engage in sex. Tamot nafshi mot yesharim, may my soul die the death of the righteous, shebahem, and the point is the righteous ones amongst the Israelites. So you're getting a sense, a little sense of the complexity of the Hebrew here and the need to be able to interpret it. But interestingly, though, we're just going to see, we're going to go right into narrative here. Vayomer Balak el Bilam, and King Balak said to Bilam, Me asitali, what have you done to me? Lakov oivai lekachticha, I took you to curse my enemies. V'hine berachta barech, and in fact, indeed, you've done just the opposite. You've blessed them. Vaya'an vayomar, and he responded and said, so of course Balaam to Balak, Halo et asher yasim Hashem befi, indeed that which God places in my mouth, oto eshmor ledaber, I have to be on guard to speak it, whatever God is telling me. So again, okay, it's significant that what Balaam is reinforcing is that this isn't this isn't coming from him as a human being. These words of blessing are coming from a divine source, from a source that there is no greater source than that. So he's again underlining the nature of this blessing. Vayomer elav Balak. So Balak said to him, Lecha na'iti, please go with me, el makom, to a place, acher, a different place, asher tir'enu misham, where you will see him from there. Ephes katsehu tir'eh. However, you'll only see a part of him. You'll only see a part of the Israelite encampment. V'chulo lo tir'eh. But you won't see the entire encampment. V'kovno li misham, and curse him for me from there. So in sort of thinking a little bit about what's the logic going on here, and the idea that it's impossible to curse the entire encampment of the Israelites, but maybe just a few of them you might be able to curse. That's sort of where Balak's coming from, right? You don't have to try and do the whole job, even if you do part of the job, trying to uh, compromise, right? So we're gonna see. Let's see if there's any. Here we go. Vekovno li, curse him for me. Lashon sivui. So we have to understand this is an imperative. In other words, Lashon sivui. He's commanding Balaam. Kalalehu li, curse him for me. Another verse. Vayikachehu state sofim, and he took him to the field of the scouts. Right? We actually have Har Tzofim in Jerusalem, translated as Mount Scopus. In other words, and Rashi will explain the nature of that. El Rosh HaPisgah, to the heights of the Pisgah, the mountain called Pisgah. Vayivin Shiva Mizbachot, and he built 7 altars. Vaya'al Far Va'ayel B'Mizbeach, and he sacrificed a bull and a ram on the altar, on each altar. State Sofim. So here we go. The field of scouts. Makom Gavoa Haya. There was a very high location, a high place. Shesham Hatzofe Omed, where a scout would stand. Lishmor im Yavo Chayil ala Ir, to guard to see if an army is approaching a city, so they'd be able to warn them ahead of time, right? Rosh HaPisgah. So why the need to name the actual place? Bilam lo haya kosem kavalak. So he says, that in fact Balak was a greater sorcerer than Balaam, that the king who hired Balaam was actually a greater sorcerer. Ra'a Balak, so Balak saw, Sha'atida pirza liparetz Israel. He saw that in the future there would be a breach in the Israelites. What's that? Misham, from that place, Shesham met Moshe. Because we know from later on that Moses actually died on the Pisgah. And this is the point that Balak realized this, that he was a greater sorcerer, wizard than Balaam, and that's why he took him to that place. There was another reason why he took him to Pisgah, to see part of the Israelite encampment, and because he knew that Moses was going to die there. Kisavur, so he was convinced, he argued, Shisham Tachul Alehem Aklala, that in that particular place, since Moses was going to die there, which of course itself was a tragedy and a curse, quote, quote, right? That in fact the curse would apply in that place. It would be effective in that place. Vezohi hapirza sha'ani ro'eh. And this is the breach which I see, because he was telling him where he was going to take him. Let's go on. All right. Vayomer el Balak, and he said, this is Balaam, of course, responding to Balak. He says, Vayomer el Balak, hitatzev cho al olatecha, so remain here or stand here by your offering, by your sacrifice. Va'ani ikare ko, and I will chance there. I will happen to take myself repaired to, as you can see in the Aramaic over here, right? Itmete. So he's going to go to a different place while Balak stands by the sacrifice. So here we go. Ikare ko me'et HaKadosh Baruch Hu. So he's saying that Balaam is saying that that God, the Holy One, blessed be He, will tell him where to go. Ikare lashon itpaal. He's saying this is it. It has it's reflexive, even though it's not itkara or itkare. It's nevertheless this dot in the kuf in some ways lets us know that it's actually itpael form. It's a reflexive form. I will be happen. I will be called to there. So as it were. right? I'll be taken there. So the idea that when he says ikare, right, he's not saying I'll go there. He says, in a sense, I will be summoned there. I will be made to go there. Vayikar Hashem el Balaam. So this is the verb that is used to indicate God's prophecy to Balaam. And it comes from a word, even though it can say Ara Memar, the statement, the word of the Lord appeared min kodam, from before the Lord, right? So there's a word kara to mean happen, right? Mikre would be a chance happening. And so it's a way of describing the way in which God communicated with Balaam in this chance manner. So let's take a look. Okay. Vayasim davar befiv, and he placed a word in his mouth. Vayomer, and he says, Shuv, this is to God speaking to Balaam. Uh, let me make sure I got Shuv el Balak, return to Balak, v'chod to daber, and speak in this manner. Let's take, here we go. Vayasim davar pifiv, this expression of he placed a word in his mouth, he put a word in his mouth. Uma hasima hazot. And what are we talking about in placing, right? What's this placing that we're talking about? Ume chasar ba'omar, okay? And what does he lack? What does scripture lack when it says, when he said, Shuv el Balak, v'chod tedaber, return to Balak and speak in this manner. Ella, but this is what's going on. Keshaya shomea she'eno nirsha lekalel, that when Balaam saw that he had no permission to curse, he had no permission, he wasn't allowed to curse. Amar, he thought, Ma ani chozer etzel Balak. Why should I return to Balak? Why should I go back to Balak, letza'aro, to cause him pain? Right? Because he knew this was going to happen, and it was upsetting to upset him. It was upsetting Balak. This is mentioned in Sanhedrin, Tractate Sanhedrin, page 105. V'natan lo HaKadosh Baruch Hu resen, I'm going to say, v'chaka befiv. And the Holy One, blessed be He, placed a bridle and a bit into his mouth, ka'adam hapokes behema v'chaka, just like a person places a bit in an animal's mouth. In other words, why do you do that? In order to guide it, el asher yirtzeh, to wherever he wants. So the reason why we use that technique with regards to a horse is because a horse's mouth is soft and it feels that the bit is what hurts the horse if he doesn't turn his head in the direction that you're taking the bridle. And the horse is going to move in the direction his head is facing. So likewise, we're using this language to describe the way in which God led Balaam. Amarle, he said to him, Al korchacha tashuv el Balak. So God said to Balaam, against your will, you're going to go back to Balak. You're going to have to say what you have to say, regardless of if it upsets him or not. So I'm going to stop here and take any questions that you may have. And so I'm going to stop the share and welcome any questions you might have here on this. Any thoughts? Any questions? Yeah, Harlan?
Toward the end of the Parsha, uh, Balak was uh, getting the Jewish people to uh, coerce with the Midians.
Yes,
And that was a terrible thing.
right. The Moabite women. Yes, right,
Yeah.
right.
I
So
don't know why
that's of
they.
course that's later on in the story, and that's part of
Yeah.
the lack of gratitude on the part of the Jewish people for what. And in some ways, it's saying that we should recognize, the way in which God protects us and God loves us. We should be
Yeah.
able to appreciate that. So,
Yeah.
any other thoughts, my friends? Yeah? Okay.
Mordecai, can I call you like
Yes,
11 in about a half hour?
I believe so. Give me a second. I'm going to stop the recording. Hold on a second.